Hey, Pulse peeps. So today I wanted to talk about 7 tricks that bodybuilders use to look the way they do. These are things that most top-level bodybuilders are aware of, but if you're a novice in the sport, or even if you have a few shows under your belt where you're just a huge fan of the sport, you may not know that bodybuilders use some of these techniques to create the superhuman look that we have become accustomed to seeing. You will not hear anything in this video about steroids, because in this day and age, honestly, if you don't know that top bodybuilders are using steroids, you have no business even watching this video. So if you're not at the level where you know some things but not all things, you're not a pro but you're not a ranked beginner either, you will get something out of this video. You will enjoy it. So please, in the comments section, no comments about steroids, okay? One of the most important things I teach my clients on a regular basis and hammer into them is the importance of drinking water every day. 1/2 to 1 gallon a day is usually prescribed, and I harp on them to get it in, as water is responsible for so many critical physical functions. However, in the days leading up to a show, those instructions change drastically. Bodybuilders, in an attempt to thin their skin as much as possible in the days leading up to a competition, will manipulate sodium, carbohydrates, and water in a very specific way. The result is that the sub-Q water, or water held under the skin, is pulled into the muscle cells, simultaneously thinning the skin and filling out the muscle. But part of this process demands that the athlete stops drinking water about 36 hours before stage time. This leads to dehydration, extreme thirst, fatigue, and sometimes cramping. There have been cases where this cramping was fatal to the bodybuilder, such as the case of Mohammed Ben Aziza, who collapsed backstage after his first pro win and passed away due to heart failure brought about by dehydration. So, whereas water is normally a healthy thing for bodybuilders to take in the final days before the show, it becomes non-existent. Dehydration, to the very extreme degree, is used to achieve the look that these guys have on stage. Bodybuilders are judged on muscularity, symmetry, and definition. One component of definition is known as vascularity, or how much your veins show. This vascularity is usually synonymous with having thin skin or low body fat levels, so it's a very desired thing to have on stage. There are several tricks bodybuilders use to increase their vascularity before going on stage, like drinking a glass of wine about 30 minutes before stage time will bring the veins out. Eating rice cakes and jelly, the simple sugars will bring out the veins. Some take large doses of vitamin B3, otherwise known as niacin. Niacin is a vasodilator, and as such, will open up the blood vessels, making them very visible if you're lean enough. All of these tricks are time-tested and popular. However, in 2005, I ushered in the era of the hairdryer. I had noticed that every time I tanned, the heat from the tanning beds brought out all my veins, or if I were laying out like on a hot day, all the veins came out. So I thought, how could I bring that heat to a show? I decided to, instead of traditionally pumping up backstage by working out, I would just use a hairdryer set on its hottest setting and run it up and down my body. It worked like a charm. And quite honestly, it pissed off a lot of the other guys backstage who were busting their asses to pump up. The next year, I saw at least like 3 other guys using a hairdryer backstage. So it must work. Getting enough food in to build a 250-pound body in hard condition is a multifaceted undertaking that, among other things, involves eating huge amounts of food. Many guys don't have the natural appetite to consume all of this food. Not to mention the time it takes to sit there and chew and eat 7 huge food meals a day. This gruesome but often necessary trick is not for the faint-hearted, but I do know many guys who do it. They will take their tuna and sweet potato and put it in a damn blender and mix it with water and make a tuna, sweet potato, and yam shake, rather. An actual shake out of their food. liquefying their tuna and their sweet potato. Take a fraction of the time, and like Rocky drinking his raw egg, it's actually badass. Mules that takes a special individual to do that, honestly. But then again, bodybuilders are definitely a different breed. Somewhat related to the last segment, food intake is critical, often a very difficult thing to consistently nail in a top bodybuilder's plan due to the sheer volume of calories that need to be consumed. Some bodybuilders turn to peptides for a solution. A peptide is very simply put a specific amino acid chain sequence of amino acids that produce a specific physical effect. Very well known peptide, as an example, is growth hormone, or GH. We've all heard of it, but few know that GH is simply a 191 amino acid sequence. If you change, add, or subtract an amino acid here or there, you get a different compound that has a completely different effect. Another example of a peptide is melanotan, an amino acid sequence that, when injected, affects the cells responsible for pigmentation and will turn their user a deep, dark tan. Well, there is also a peptide called GHRP6 that, when injected, will vastly increase the user's appetite, allowing them to ingest the superhuman amounts of food necessary to grow to the degree that they want to grow. Use of this little trick allows them to eat the way that they need to and grow the way they want to. Everyone knows that insulin is used by diabetics to control blood sugar, but many people in the bodybuilding industry are still unaware of the role that insulin can play in making a bodybuilder go from big to huge. Insulin is known as what's called a storage hormone, in that it takes circulating nutrients in the bloodstream and shuttles them kind of to specific cells in the body. Insulin has been likened to a sort of cellular taxi cab that takes nutrients and drops them off at specific destinations, like muscle cells or fat cells. Insulin is also, unbeknownst to many people, the most anabolic hormone in the body. As such, it can be used to grow very large muscles in a very short period of time, if used in a specific way. Bodybuilders have been using this very cheap, very readily available drug to get freaky sized muscles for a long time. Most people think it was Dorian Yates who pioneered using insulin in this way, but a couple decades before Dorian was a man named Tim Belknap. Tim was a type 1 diabetic and was insulin dependent. He was also one of the most densely muscled men the world had ever seen up to that point in time. At some point, Tim realized that if he timed his insulin and his carbs around his training in a specific way, it caused enormous gains, and quickly too. It didn't take long for the rest of the bodybuilding world to pick up on this correlation, and over the next couple of decades, more and more guys began experimenting with insulin and its anabolic properties to build their own physiques. With every good thing, though, there is usually some bad. And insulin combined with GH has been blamed for the huge bubble guts that exist in the top guys these days. However, this may or may not be true. These days, many have heard of this compound, but there are still quite a few people who are huge fans of the sport who aren't aware of this little trick. Synthol is a general name for an inert oil that is injected into the belly of the muscle to increase its size and fullness. This oil really has no anabolic properties, so it's not a steroid per se, but it does cause localized inflammation. And because it breaks down very slowly in the body, it builds upon itself, so to speak, with repeated injections, and eventually causes a very dramatic size effect in smaller muscles such as biceps, triceps, shoulders, and traps. If the user doesn't overdo it and knows their anatomy really well, they could use synthol as a sculptor, kind of would use clay to form and perfect a sculpture. But unfortunately, many users of synthol are just complete idiots. The more is better attitude, and synthol, that is definitely not the way to do it. These guys end up at best looking like a cartoon character that has been put in a blender, or like their muscles are made out of wax that have been melted over a flame. And in worst case scenarios, getting massive infections, sterile abscesses, and having to get them drained in a very painful procedure. There have been some cases of guys having large parts of their limbs cut out due to the tissue dying, and in more rare cases, amputation. This is, of course, only in the cases of these extremists who have serious mental issues or examples of dirty product, most likely made in someone's bathtub or sold in the black market. Judicious use of a reputable source is usually without mishap. Most people don't think of this trick at all, but in this age of the internet and the popularity of the platforms such as Instagram and the amount of importance placed on followers, bodybuilders, fitness models, physique competitors, pretty much all doctor their photos in subtle but significant ways to make themselves look as close to inhumanly perfect as possible. An inch off the waist here, an inch on the biceps there, a filter to make them look more defined here, some quad sweep added there, and boom. I've met with scores of clients whose goals are so outrageously unrealistic because they want to look like so-and-so from Instagram. I tell them, look, so-and-so from Instagram doesn't even look like so-and-so from Instagram. Nobody does. It's not real. It's filtered and morphed and doctored to the point where it doesn't even resemble the original shot. And certainly, if you saw this person in the gym, you might not even know it was them. Your IG hero would go unnoticed. I get wanting to look like you're best in your pictures. I get that. But creating what is essentially a whole new person through the miracle of modern Photoshop apps, it's not only completely misleading to the fans of that person, but I can't imagine how posting these pics in any way is satisfying to these people when they know they don't even resemble the posted pic. Nonetheless, it's our seventh and final trick.